Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Happy Friday. I'm Ashli Watts. I'm the president and CEO of the Kentucky Chamber of Commerce, and I am very excited today to have a distinguished group of panelists to join us for a conversation about session. I know that our correspondence the last couple of weeks has been primarily focused on the coronavirus and the business response and what we can all do to help. And in the midst of that, we actually did have the ending of a legislative session. And so I know I've been doing this for about 16 years in Frankfort, and it's probably the oddest session I have ever seen, and I'm sure our panelists will agree. But there was a lot of good, positive legislation that was able to cross the finish line, and I'm excited to hear from the panelists about that. Really quickly, I just wanted to tell everyone about the Chamber's new initiative, which is Restart Kentucky. And Restart Kentucky, you may have heard about it. We unveiled it a couple days ago. It really is just kind of an umbrella of all things that we can do to help Kentucky get kind of restarted and get back into the economy. A lot of this is education, which I'm kind of including this panel of discussion today with that. We're going to be having at least 2 webinars a week. Next week, we have one on Tuesday with public health officials and the Foundation for a Healthy Kentucky to really have public health be at the focus of all we do to make sure that when we do return to work, we do it in the safest and most responsible way possible. And then next Thursday, we have Dr. Paul Coombs, an economist that worked for many years at the University of Louisville and also has helped us in various capacities talk about the state of Kentucky's economy and really kind of what all this looks like moving forward. The next week, we have an education panel talking about how all of this affects education from preschool to higher education. And I can say for once on a Zoom in the last couple of weeks, I am actually in my office because in addition to working, I am also now homeschooling a 4-year-old and a 7-year-old, and their favorite pastime is kind of making sure that they disrupt all of my Zoom calls. So I just try to make it as peaceful on this call as possible. And then we're also going to have a good conversation in 2 weeks with all the hospitals in the state and kind of talking about what they're going to need to kind of reopen, what their capacity is, and really the state of all the hospitals in Kentucky. And so we'll be unveiling more of that. We also have a task force that we are putting together with the top business leaders and education leaders here in Kentucky. And we're very excited on this initiative to be partnering with the KCTCS Community College program to really kind of put the best minds together to see how we can do a safe and responsible reopening here in Kentucky and all work together to make sure that hopefully we come out of this on the other side stronger than ever before. So with that, anything that you guys need from the Kentucky Chamber, you guys know how to reach us. All of this information is on our website, kychamber.com. We have done extensive work in the last month to collect PPEs, the personal protective equipment, from all of our members across the state. We've collected thousands of masks and gloves and gowns, and we're still working at this very minute on that effort. We've also been able to help people get the PPP loans, the small business loans for businesses, as well as answer any questions on unemployment insurance and all of that. So we just want to be a resource to all of you all the businesses in Kentucky, and help however we can. So please feel free to reach out to any of us while we kind of all go through this together. So now I will turn it over to our distinguished panel, and to lead our panel today, Jason Keller with Charter Communications, and Jason is our Policy Council Chair here at the Chamber. He chairs our Competitiveness Policy Council, and so we're very excited to have him moderate this today. I'm excited that all 4 leaders were able to join us on this Friday afternoon. And so with us today, we have Senate President Robert Stivers, House Speaker David Osborne, Senate Minority Leader Morgan McGarvey, and House Minority Leader Joni Jenkins. So thank you all so much for taking time out of your schedule to Zoom from wherever you are, whether in your house or your office, and take some time out of your day to talk with us. We're going to go about an hour for right now. So at this point, I will turn it over to Jason, who will start kind of answering the questions. Again, we do have the chat box open on this Zoom call. So if you do want to submit a question, you can do that on chat. But I know that everyone that signed up also had the ability to ask her question before you join the call as well. So with that, I will turn it over to Jason Keller.
Thanks, Ashli. And this is a sign that we definitely live in interesting times that we're meeting today via Zoom. I think I told Ashli earlier today that I think I've been on more Zoom, WebEx, GoToMeeting, and every other type of video chat over the last month than I ever have been in my entire career. So thank you all for joining us this afternoon and taking time out of your schedules to do it. And I know we have a number of questions, and certainly COVID-19 response is top of mind for many right now. But let's talk a little bit about the session. The session, obviously, a number of accomplishments, a number of important things got done. So let me start, Senator Stivers, with you. What would you say is the number one accomplishment of the General Assembly this past session?
First of all, glad to be with all my fellow members of the legislature, and I'm glad to be here with you and Ashley in the chamber. I think I would have to say 1 and 1A. One, we got the budget done and completed on a one-year basis because our revenue estimates basically are not accurate. They were developed in December, well before the COVID-19 struck us in our revenues. So we came with a one-year budget. Secondly, I think behind that, we got out of Frankfurt doing our jobs in a timely fashion and really restricted our exposure to our members, to our staff, and to that transient population of people who are there interested in watching. So from a policy standpoint, getting the budget with 7 days less, I think, or maybe 8 days less than we usually do, I think is our number one accomplishment.
Let's make this a round robin. Leader McGarvey, I'll go to you next. What from your perspective, what was the top accomplishment this year?
We'll start off all getting along. It is great to be here. Appreciate everybody doing this. I'll agree with President Stivers. I think our top accomplishment was getting a budget and doing it in a way where you had both parties recognizing the reality we all now face. As I tell people, we use that consensus forecasting group, that nonpartisan group. We use their numbers to estimate the revenue we're going to have. The partisan fights get in how we spend the revenue we have, but we all try to agree on what that number is. Those numbers are out the window now. So I think it was the right thing to do for the legislature to pass a budget. That's the job of the legislature, to appropriate money, but to do so recognizing we can't use the two-year format we've been used to, and we've got to come back and look at, one, how much money the state is actually going to have, two, how much federal stimulus money we get in, and how that money can be used, what strings are attached to it. So I'm glad we got a budget out. Another thing I'm happy we did as well was Senate Bill 150, a bill that came in at one time, it dealt with surprise billing, and then it kind of became a COVID relief package. When you saw the legislature, we expanded unemployment benefits, we expanded access to health care, we helped people out who are suffering in that bill. And as our world, as everyone's world sort of got turned upside down in early to mid-March, I thought that bill was a good response of the legislature to what's going on.
Speaker, there's been a consistent theme as to what the most impactful piece of legislation that passed the session. Would you agree? And if so, is there another subject that you thought was important that the legislature was able to pass this session?
Well, I'm going to keep it pretty consistent. As I said all year long when we were talking about priority bills, that the number one priority bill that we were going to have this year was the budget. And that was the ultimate policy document that we would pass this year. And certainly the focus of our session. I think when we passed our version out in March, everybody was pretty excited about some of the things we were finally able to do with the budget, some things that we had hoped to be able to do for some period of time, to be able to restore some funding to higher ed, to be able to reward our hardworking public employees with small but important pay raises. Obviously, that all came to a crashing halt in April or the 1st of April into March when the world got turned upside down for everybody, including state government. And I do agree with what both President Stivers and Leader McGarvey said, and that is that it was a good bipartisan, bicameral effort. I don't think any of us loved what we were doing, but the fact of the matter is we did it the right way. We acted like I think people would expect us to act in a crisis, and that is as adults and professionals in a bipartisan manner to create the best document that we possibly could for Kentucky. Beyond that, I also think that the reactionary measures that we passed for COVID relief, one that Senator McGarvey mentioned, the other was Senate Bill 177, which was the education relief bill that gave them the flexibility, the ability to use virtual technologies, expand NTI days, have flexibility with their calendars, with testing, with accountability. Those were important measures. But then there were some things that were left undone. And while it was one that was significantly left undone, the movement or the progress we made on House Bill 1, which is public assistance reform, I think this year was really significant. We passed a bill out of the House that I think was transformative, and one that was one and will make significant difference in the lives of Kentuckians going forward. As we got into a position where we had to limit access to the Capitol, we didn't feel like it was appropriate to continue on with that. At this point, that is one that has been very well vetted, but also needs the input of everybody impacted, and just didn't feel like it was appropriate this year to continue with that. So we'll pick that up next year where we left off and move forward with what I think will be a very important piece of legislation.
Leader Jenkins, I'll let you finish this one off from your perspective. The 2020 session was the main accomplishment.
Well, thank you, and thank you for everybody participating today. And I'm apologizing. All of a sudden, my cats are really interested in me. They've been ignoring me all day, so you may see a photo bomb from a kitty cat. I would echo what everyone said. The most important thing was to pass the budget. And I think you will, if you look back, you will see that the House was done in a very bipartisan way. Not everybody got what they wanted, but I've fully supported going to a one-year budget, given all the challenges that we were seeing this year. And I would also like to salute the majority leadership in the House for responding to the coronavirus and coming up with innovative ways for us to meet. So our 100 members in that very crowded chamber could feel comfortable and safe and still have a say in what was going on in the chamber. And I will say that Speaker Osborne and his colleagues were very, very flexible in that. It made for some long days when we were remote voting, but I really appreciate working with them to make sure that we created not only a safe place for our members, but also modeled good behaviors for the rest of Kentucky.
Well, thanks, Leader. I think to your point, I'm not sure a Zoom call would be fitting without a cat or dog sighting these days. So that's generally what we see. And I'll tell you, so Leader Jenkins, let me stick with you. Speaker Osborne mentioned one of the issues that was left off the table that didn't get done in House Bill 1. From your perspective, what was the most significant piece of legislation that didn't make it across the finish line this year?
Oh gosh, there were so many things that didn't. There were some things that we were really glad didn't make it all the way through from the perspective of the Democrat House members. We felt that Senate Bill 1 had a lot of work to do on it. So we were glad that that did not pass and that we could come back and revisit that issue of how we make Kentucky accessible and welcoming to immigrants, but also keep an eye on public safety. House Bill 1, I think, still had some work to do with it. And I applaud the speaker for recognizing that when you're making major policy changes, if you have a Capitol that is shut down to visitors, so voices were not heard. And I look forward in the interim to continue talking about public assistance and ways that we can move people to self-sufficiency. I think my caucus has some very different ideas about how that can happen, but I think our end goals are the same in this, of having families that are strong and healthy and economically sound and do not need to rely on public assistance, but knowing that public assistance is a big safety net for many of our Kentuckians.
Great, thank you. President Stivers, I'll toss that question over to you as well.
some that didn't. There's way too many to even attempt to try to say which bills that should or should not have. And we can talk with House Bill 1 or Senate Bill 1 or several of the other bills that were designated as priorities. I think really though, and not Jason trying to take over your show or anything else, but really I think there was a lot of really other good bills. And I want to say this about the Speaker in the House. What they did, you know, they have such a much larger group, and it was difficult under these times to conduct business and do what we did with 7 to 8 days less than what we normally have. But we could get here, and I think a lot of things that may have partisan perspectives and some have policy perspectives. So many things were put on the shelf in the last 3 weeks, where we were only meeting 1 day or 2 days a week. I could come with a whole list of things, but truly I think there was a whole lot of positive things. I want to compliment actually the 2-3 people who are all on here. I think maybe one of the biggest things that passed was the fact that we kept the funding and took care of the University of Louisville Hospital. That may be one of the bigger accomplishments outside the budget that did happen and did happen early. And I don't think people really understand how big that was.
And Senator, just to be clear, you're welcome to take this over at any point.
Well, some people may think I try to do that too often.
Leader McGarvey, let me get your input on that. What if you had one more day left in session, what would you have liked to see make it across?
Well, the first thing I'll do is start off by being realistic. I don't shy away from the fact I'm the Democratic leader of the Senate. So there are things I would have liked to have seen passed that probably wouldn't have stood a chance of passing. So let's talk about things I think could have passed and had broad bipartisan support, or at least would have liked to see pass. I think we left 2 big opportunities on the doorstep of the Senate, and that's medical marijuana and sports gaming. I know medical marijuana was passed by the House, sports gaming was close. I think you had broad bipartisan support, maybe more of a rural-urban issue on both of those, but still nice coalitions. For medical marijuana, that would have been a big step forward. And of course, for sports gaming, look, it's not a cure. This is not a panacea for Kentucky's budget woes. The revenues will probably go down even this year from what was expected in previous estimates, just like every other revenue, but it is revenue positive, and it's revenue we need, and I think it was fairly low-hanging fruit. So I would have liked to have seen those get through. And then another bill that I think continues to get bipartisan support in both chambers but doesn't seem to pass is a restoration of voting rights. We could have amended Kentucky's Constitution this year. We can only amend the Constitution in even-numbered years. So if we're going to amend the Constitution on that, we can't do it again until 2022 at the earliest. We're one of 2 states that doesn't allow for some type of automatic restoration. I would have liked to have seen that happen. So those are 3 bills, but I echo the comments of President Stiver and Speaker Osborne and Leader Jenkins, and that given what we had to face the last few days, some things got put off. But, you know, the end of the session is traditionally when the most things get done, even in a year that we're not dealing with a pandemic. To lose those days at the end of the session were valuable days, and some things just unfortunately got left on the cutting room floor.
Let's turn to a topic that has obviously been central in all of our lives as Kentuckians and across America in COVID-19 over the last several weeks now. Speaker Osborne, let me start with you with this question. In terms of how we move forward, you heard the outset, Ashli mentioned the Chamber's new Restart Kentucky initiative. What are, from your perspective, some of the metrics and goals that you are looking at as far as the state meeting in terms of trying to reopen business and get us back moving forward? How do you see that? How do you see that working out over the next over the coming weeks?
Yeah, it's going to be difficult to quantify and to put a real timeline on. I think that as much as everybody would love to see, you know, a check mark on a certain date where doors fly back open, I don't think that's reasonable. As I've said a number of times, you know, you can drive up and down any downtown in Kentucky and see closed signs everywhere on the doors. And I don't think that's going to be a matter of just flipping those signs over and letting the public back in. I do, however, though, think that we've got to start talking about the process. And as part of that process, I think it's important to look at some of the things transitioning away from what we may define as essential and non-essential and start talking about what is safe and not safe. There are businesses that can operate that may not necessarily be considered essential, that cannot be operated in a safe manner. And I think for those businesses, for those workers, for those employees, if they can comply with CDC guidelines, if they can make sure that they're protecting not only their employees but the public, then we've got to start putting those people back to work and letting them reopen their businesses.
Leader Jenkins, let me go to you with that same question. What are you seeing in terms of the coming weeks and months ahead to try to reopen the state?
Well, I agree with Speaker Osborne. I think, number one, we should follow the science and we should be listening to our public health experts on this. But I think giving folks a little hope that things are going to return somewhat to normal as soon as safely possible. I think, we're seeing, Governor Beshear acted decisively and quickly, and I think that's why we're seeing our numbers not look nearly as terrifying as other states are. But we also know that, we may have not peaked yet. I smiled when President Stivers talked about the U of L Health Center, because I never realized that when I co-sponsored that bill with Speaker Osborne that it would become very personal to me very quickly. Last week I had to take my dad to the emergency room. And as I left him at the doors going into the emergency room, I thought, gosh, why didn't we think to have some of these hospitals designated as COVID hospitals and some still open for other folks that may need services, whether elective or non-elective, in a safe manner. And so that's just one thing that I think that we could look at, is how can we help our hospitals in this economic time. I know many of them, especially rural hospitals, are having a really difficult time. They have very few people hospitalized for coronavirus, but they're sitting empty. And can we look at a way that could safely bring patients back the healthcare that they need, but still be available if we do see an increase in the number of coronavirus patients? So I think there are a lot of things that we can take a breath now and think about very clearly and thoroughly and based on what our public health experts are telling us. I think people are eager to get back to some source of normalcy, and I would hope that Governor Beshear and the folks that are making these decisions can look at those things. So I think they've done an excellent job so far.
President Stivers, let's go to you. What are you looking at, or looking for, in terms of how we reopen the state?
Representative Jenkins makes an interesting point there, because a lot of the rural hospitals have just totally unused assets and space. I don't know if we couldn't formulate a model, because it seems like where the hot spots are in the more urban areas where you have people in close proximity. Maybe we could do something like that and even share space to where if you wanted to do some elective surgeries, come to Hazard, come to Manchester, come to London, come to the rural hospitals where we have excess capacity and do some of those. Because truly, St. Clair's, I think, and Moorhead laid off about 300. Hazard ARH, maybe we could think of some innovative ideas. But I think, I've said this quite often, when I walk in the Senate chamber, you don't leave your life experiences at home. And my daughter called me, and she works for a furniture company over in Somerset that has 6 or 8 places that they have pretty good retail sales. And she said, Dad, why are we shutting down when we probably have less exposure than a Walmart, a Lowe's, or other places? We could easily distance ourselves and still be open and have limited number of people in our stores, but now 10 or 12 of us are going to be laid off for a while. And I think we could do some things like that. And I want to commend both the House people on the House members on this. The Speaker and them came with a bill late on Wednesday night, and I think it had some really good ideas. The Senate got it. We looked at it. We had some procedural concerns, but those are the types of ideas we need to start discussing now in some type of forum to where individual groups or associations can bring forward criteria that are CDC compliant to allow individuals to open up and have business in this era of COVID-19, but be safe to the respective patrons.
Leader McGarvey, I'll go to you. I know Louisville's obviously your home and a place where we're seeing significant activity on this front. What, from your perspective, what are you looking for as the state opens back up?
I think you're hearing a somewhat, different words, but largely the same ideas from the four of us. And that is, we're going to be guided by the data and the experts on this topic. It's not going to be a gut feel of what can happen. And to that end, I think the governor is doing a tremendous job of communicating with people and figuring out ways to act quickly to make sure that we do flatten this curve and stop the spread. But I think implicit in when he says that, let's flatten the curve and stop the spread, is the part of the sentence he doesn't say, which is so we can get back to some sort of new normal. And that's what we all want to happen. I just saw a cat photobomb Leader Jenkins.
I think that was Ruthie B. Ginsburg.
We're lucky that one of my three children and my wife, who works full-time, who are all in the house here today with me, have not jumped in front of the screen. We're all looking at some way to get back to a type of normal. I heard Speaker Osborne talk about an essential business or a non-essential business. I haven't talked to anyone who doesn't think their business is essential for them or their families, but most of them understand that we are in this together. And the quicker that we can stop the spread and flatten that curve, that hopefully we can get back to work. I can tell you in my at least daily conversations with the governor's office, they're having these conversations. They're talking to hospitals, they're talking to businesses and restaurants and all different types of people. What are you experiencing? How can we help? What are you seeing? What are some things we can begin to do? So I think they are working on it 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, getting the input. And I think that all of us, the people on this call, the people in the governor's office and people across the state want the same thing. We want people to be safe. We want businesses to be protected. And we want to get back to some type of normal as soon as it is safe to do so.
Certainly, the health of Kentuckians is paramount. The folks that are participating in this Zoom call today, that are listening in, are certainly also interested in the political aspects of this and the primary elections that were pushed back to June. Leader McGarvey, let me stick with you on this. How much do you think the pandemic will impact voter turnout, if at all, in June? And should people be afraid to go to the polling booth at this point?
Well, let me just say, you've asked a great question. I don't know that we really know. It's funny. President Stivers has probably been having some of the same conversations I've had the last 2 days, because we have an interesting opportunity in the Senate in that we have a special election coming up on primary day. So even different than what you talk about within the political parties, this will be the first Democrat-Republican election held under COVID-19. And at least in what I was getting information from yesterday, maybe President Stivers has heard something different, is that on June 23rd, which is scheduled to be the primary, the race we're talking about is in part of Jefferson and all of Oldham County, that at least they're not expecting for all the polling locations to be open for the June 23rd primary in Jefferson County, that they are looking at doing mail-in ballots, but those mail-in ballots will have to be requested. And that they'll be sending notices out potentially in mid-May to get that done. So I think you could see a much lower turnout. I don't know whether the Secretary of State's office or the clerks in Kentucky will have all of the polling stations open on June 23rd, which is our first election under COVID-19. And we're trying to get as many people as possible to vote, make it as easy as possible to do. But as you just said before you came to me, the safety of Kentuckians is the paramount concern. We want to operate an election in which we give as many people access as possible, but in the safest way possible as well.
Senator Stivers, you're interested in your perspective on how this may impact the state's primary election.
I'm going to take a little bit different position. Actually, I think people get out to vote when there are dire circumstances. I think they feel more of a responsibility. The logistics become a question, as Senator McGarvey said, but I think people generally tend to rise to the occasion and think these are the times we need to vote. And I think they make a greater effort. And I also think when you look at it, and as I look at the screen, I'm basically looking at 3 Louisvillians and a Clay County here. So I almost feel like I'm outnumbered a little bit. But to that extent, our voting precincts are quite large. So precinct workers wouldn't be really put at risk because they're in our schools. I can't say what it's like in Louisville, but a lot of our schools and our areas of the cafeterias. So you could really get a lot of social distancing where people could enter and feel safe and comfortable. And our parking lots at our schools are open. So ample parking space. So it may be a little bit different in Jefferson County or Oldham, but I feel people would be very comfortable feeling like they could go out and vote, be it June 23rd or this November, because the distance that can be kept and the safety factor, which is of a concern to all of us, people can feel comfortable with.
Speaker Osborne, I'll go to you next with the same question.
Well, I think it's like everything else. We're kind of feeling our way in a new normal right now, but it's one of the reasons that we included some language in House Bill 351 that we passed along with the revenue package and the budget, which gave some additional flexibility on conducting elections. It gave, as current law is laid out, it only allows for the governor and the Secretary of State to change the date and time of elections. We gave them the added flexibility to jointly adjust the manner in which people vote. So if there are some other protocols that can be put in place, securely put in place, then this gives them the opportunity to do some different things in a coordinated measure to make it easier for people to vote.
Representative Jenkins, I'll turn this same question over to you as well.
I think the interesting thing in talking to some candidates, while we don't take a position in primaries, we are getting questions from candidates about how do you campaign in this kind of atmosphere. So I think we're going to see some innovative things happen in terms of political fundraising and outreach to their voters. But I think the number one thing is not only do we want to make sure voters are safe, but when you think about in Jefferson County, certainly in the precincts that I'm most familiar with, the folks that are our precinct workers that sit there all day, most of them fall within the at-risk categories. They're mostly older retired folks. And not only do we want to provide access to voters, we also want to make sure that those poll workers are safe during their time there. And as President Stivers was talking about, the utilization of schools, schools won't be in session then, we don't think, June 23rd. So there could be some innovative ways that we think about how we can get people in safely and how we can keep those poll workers safe while they're there.
Great. Let's go to our first question that came in, or at least the first question that I have seen come in from our chat room. Since this is a revenue question, let me start in the House with you, Speaker Osborne. And this comes from Iris Wilbur at GLI. She asks, it appears the forgiven portions of the Paycheck Protection Program loans will likely be subject to state income taxes. When the legislature reconvenes, is that something that you might consider addressing?
It is something that we actually started talking about this past week with our budget staff, and had a little interaction with the governor's budget office on it, but didn't get into any details. I think it is something we will definitely consider, though. What it's going to look like is a little premature to tell at this point.
Great, thank you. Let me go to our next chat question, and this is about a a Senate bill. So President Stivers, I'll start with you on this. Senate Bill 150 gave licensing boards broad discretion to waive KRS for their licenses in light of COVID-19 epidemic or pandemic. Will there be a look at the outcomes from these waivers towards broader occupational licensure reform?
You know, that's a really great question, because I think COVID-19 is going to make us look differently on how we engage on a lot of topics, from doing medicine by telemedicine types of scenarios, meetings like we're doing today. I think education is going to be a real subject matter of how it is delivered from K through your graduate programs. So I think this is going to give us an opportunity, a unique opportunity, to really evaluate and reevaluate how we do everything. And it doesn't matter what it is or how you think of it. We totally had to think differently this year because of this, but it also has brought to light that there are ways and methods and abilities to deliver because of the new technologies. And I say this quite often, I say a lot of things quite often, but David Givens, my pro tem, and I have this discussion that every session it seems like we're having to address technological advances, and for the legislature to keep up with those. And Jason, you're in one of those fields. It's really tough for one, us to have that capacity because it can be so specialized. And two, especially when you get in the healthcare area, the efficacy of technology now and what happens. So we're going to be reviewing that. And I don't think anything now is subject to be off the table for looking at new ways to deal with technology as it relates to licensure, as it relates to teaching, as it relates to basically organizations and how they require their workforce to work, whether it is at distance, off-site, or on a main campus.
Great. Well, let me ask another one, Senator McGarvey. Let me direct this next chat room question to you as well. When the legislature returns to session next year, will they be prepared to offer liability protections for businesses on COVID-19 related issues in preparations for when another health pandemic might occur?
I'm going to go back to actually what Robert just said. And I'm sorry, President Stivers. Just because we're at home, I shouldn't be so informal, Mr. President. But
please go ahead.
We're going to look at everything differently, Jason. I mean, this is a change event, and I think we're going to look at what happens and what needs to be done, what we learn from what's going on right now. I mean, when you hear every expert, every person from urban areas, rural areas, Democrat, Republican, whatever state, say, we've never seen anything like this before. It's because we haven't. We've never seen anything like this before. It's a change event. What's going to happen from this? We're going to see some change, and we're going to be evaluating all sorts of options of what is working, what isn't working, what needs to be there to help people, what doesn't. How do we get through this pandemic? I mean, we've had big debates even within the Senate. Look at what things are filed in a county clerk's office, what legal documents, important documents are filed in a county clerk's office. And what do you do if the county clerk's office is shut down and all of a sudden you can't look up deeds and titles and record mortgages and transfer automobiles and get your liens recorded and all that sort of thing. So, I mean, to answer that question, it's a vague question. And so I hate to give a vague answer, but I think we're going to be looking at all sorts of things. I'm of the age when I was in high school that chat rooms were actually a thing. They didn't have this connotation to it, and I never thought I'd be in one with the five of you all. But this is a new reality, and so we can do these, and I can wear athletic shorts right now. It doesn't mean I'm going to wear them to the chamber dinner next year, but we can do some things, and I think we're all going to be taking a look at what impact this has and just how we can make our laws, our businesses, our people, and our state better.
Jumping off from that, and let me ask this question of all four of you, and let me start, Leader Jenkins, with you. There's a significant amount of unease right now, and you've heard it from employees and also from employers about how we move forward and when we move forward. What would be your message to both employers and employees as we work to find our way through this pandemic?
Well, I think we all understand those feelings of helplessness and hopelessness. And I know everyone would love to say, oh, in 2 weeks, in 4 weeks, in 6 weeks, we're going to be back to normal. But, my message to folks would be, hang in there. We are not going to reopen before it's safe, because we don't want the sacrifices that Kentuckians have made so far. And there have been many. There have been many sacrifices made so far in folks that have not been able to go to work, who have been distanced from their families at times that, Easter Sunday was very difficult. I know for many families that were doing Zoom and weren't able for, I had the experience of taking someone to the hospital and not being able to be with them while they were in the hospital. So people have made tremendous sacrifices. We don't want those sacrifices negated because we opened up too soon and went right back to where we were, and certainly put our first responders and our medical professionals at risk and lost more lives than we would have to. So I would say, please keep continuing to reach out, to ask questions, to offer suggestions. But everybody, the governor, all of us in the legislature, we certainly do want people back to work. We do want people back to some sense of normal life, but we can't do that until it's safe for us to do so.
Speaker, I will turn to you next for your message to employers and employees across the state.
Sure. I think the anxiety is palpable around the state, around the country, around the world. People are in fear for their health, they're in fear for their mental health, they're in fear for their financial health. There are people that are literally on the verge of losing everything they have. And I think that the anger, the frustration, the disappointment is understandable. I think that we have to be understanding of the response that we're starting to see from people. People have been very, very cooperative, compliant, by and large, doing everything they can to protect themselves, to protect their employees, to protect the public in general. We can't be dismissive of those fears and those frustrations. And while there's very little that I think that any of us can say or do that are going to immediately change things for any of the people that are feeling those anxieties, please know that we are doing every incremental thing that we can do to make those things better to endure, but also easier to come out of when we do finally start opening things up. I think that we're going to make mistakes. I don't think that anybody will deny that. But one of the mistakes we can't make is I think those of us in leadership positions, especially, we've got to continue to keep the rhetoric at a minimum. We've got to continue to act like professionals, act like adults, and truly, I think that you've seen a lot of that. I think we all have a tendency to get caught up in what's going on in the social media space and the echo chamber that creates sometimes. But by and large, I think that you have seen leaders around the country that are starting to act like we would hope that they would act. And I hope that continues. And certainly there are going to be some disagreements as we move forward about how we need to do things and what we need to do. But we've got to continue to have open and honest conversations with ourselves as well as with the people that we represent.
Senator McGarvey, I will go to you next with the same question.
And I echo the comments of Leader Jenkins and Speaker Osborne. It reminds me of something my wife and I were talking about the other night and saw a podcast about empathy. And to have real empathy, you can't alter that in any way. So like, you can't have empathy for someone, or show empathy if you say, well, at least, so, you lost your job. Well, at least you didn't buy that new TV last month. So you're not out that money. I think what you see is empathy for everyone, empathy for people who are working from home, empathy for people who've lost their jobs, empathy for people who are still going to work, whether in a grocery store, driving a semi-truck that's getting goods and valuable services across the country. One of our first responders, a doctor, a nurse on the front lines of this. We have empathy. This is very hard, and it's very hard for everyone. I do believe we will get through this together, and I want employers and employees to know that we hear the concerns, we see the concerns with our own families and our own friends and our own neighbors, and we do want to be part of the solution. And so, as Speaker Osborne said, we're going to make mistakes because we didn't anticipate this. Our laws did not anticipate this. People not being able to get together, businesses not being able to be open. But we want to help. We're going to work to help. I think even despite a few, political things that happened toward the end, you saw a legislature come together on the biggest priorities, on COVID-19 relief, on the budget, and work together in a very bipartisan way to get us through this together.
President Stivers, your perspective on this.
I'm going to agree with the whole group. There's a lot of things that have been referenced here. Morgan, Senator McGarvey, sorry, Morgan will be informal, worked with Chad McCoy and a lot of the lawyers down in the House, talk about some of the business issues in these filings. It was bicameral, it was bipartisan. Everybody's made mistakes in this. Some things have slipped through the cracks. We're not always going to agree with the governor. We're going to have some disagreements, but it's not being that we're being political or not. We all have opinions. But when you think about this, and I think about Kentucky, and I think what's happened, let's look what has happened. My gosh, I'm just giving you an example how, Morgan was working with Chad McCoy, how we all came together and sat down, the governor's office walked in, and we had a briefing on where the budget was. We made great strides in working with the University of Louisville, which I know Joni and David both, and Morgan and myself were all involved in, which helps the state. We've seen some of the innovative things that have come out there that won't just help Louisville, they'll help the whole state. And let's look at the KDA and what's gone on with them coming and stepping up and volunteering to make sanitizer, and how people have come forward to really step up. And I'm going to look at Morgan because he's the youngest one here. The impacts on him probably won't be as harsh as they would if I were to contract the coronavirus. But for me, I'm not in a metropolitan area. So I tell people, if you want to come visit, we can put you on a four-wheeler and we can ride up in the mountains, which is what I'm going to do today. And hopefully you all will live vicariously through me because I'm not going to see a single soul. And can be socially distanced. So there's a lot of great things that have happened. I think you reach out to those people who don't have those opportunities. But there has been a lot of just being good Kentuckians in the last 3 weeks.
I think that's certainly a silver lining that we've seen as a result of all of this. Let me transition a little bit to the process, the legislative process that we just went through, and obviously a very different type of process, particularly for those who live and work around Frankfort. Was there anything over the past month when the Capitol was largely shut down and the legislature was left to do its work? Was there anything about the process that you learned over the past month that you would think that might work going forward in terms of the 2021 session and beyond?
And don't say keep lobbyists out.
Yeah, that's right. I agree with that. It went a lot smoother without lobbyists there.
It was certainly a lot quieter.
With that lone exception, I should have put that caveat.
I think,
obviously, I'm sorry, go ahead, Joni.
Oh, you go ahead.
As I say, obviously, we altered our procedures radically in the House, doing remote voting for the first time in history. We were very cautious about how we did that. We wanted to make sure that we were on solid legal footing, solid constitutional footing, and probably we're not as efficient as we could have been. But we wanted to act in the abundance of caution, doing this, especially with the importance of some of the legislation that we were taking up there at the end. I think that as we go forward, hopefully we'll never need that again. But I think to have a well thought out set of protocols that we can call on when we need to in the future, I think we can absolutely fine tune some of the things that we were able to do right at the end of session.
Representative Jenkins, did you want to?
Well, I was just going to say that, earlier in the year when we had a House member from my caucus, Representative Josie Raymond, who gave birth, we had some discussions about the possibility of remote voting. And I hope that we continue to leave those conversations open for very specific situations. This is 2020, and I would hope that we're going to see more young people like Senator McGarvey and others that are in our caucus. I hope we see more young parents, and being able to make those accommodations for folks, I think is something that we could look at and should look at.
Senator Stivers, is that something that the Senate would look at as well?
Well, part of the question we have on remote voting is how you want to define remote voting and the Constitution. I think the way the House did it, and they are much larger, they're 2.5 times the size we are. So it's a lot different in how we logistically move forward. But to that extent, I think everybody was on the campus grounds in Frankfurt, which I think that is what the Constitution speaks of. So there's possibilities to go there, but I want to say this for the whole group, because we had a lot of discussions about how we went through this. There's about 650 people that are there daily, and a great LRC staff, and a huge transient population of lobbyists and interested spectators. And throughout that time, from January till April 15th, only one person tested positive, and that young person is back ready to go to work when appropriate. So I think we did the right things to be able to effectuate what our constitutional mandates are, and we finished in a timely fashion. So I commend everybody that was involved, but we will always have to be aware of circumstances where we may have to adapt in the future.
Ashli, I know we still have a few minutes left here before the top of the hour. Didn't know if you had any further questions or other comments for the panel.
I think this was great. Thank you, Jason, and thank you to all of you all for participating. I know Zoom happy hours are becoming a big thing. So maybe however long we're in quarantine, we'll push this back a couple hours and do a Zoom happy hour. I bet we could get our participants up with that as well. But this has been great. Like I said, the Chamber is working to kind of put together some recommendations for each specific industry on how they can safely reopen using public health guidelines, doing education for all of our members. And so some of the things that you guys have said on here, I've been making notes. I mean, Leader Jenkins, like President Stiver said, with numerous hospitals in Louisville right now kind of being underutilized, it makes a lot of sense to maybe use some for COVID and some for other type of procedures. So anything like that you guys can think of, please let us know. We're getting recommendations from businesses every day of taking temperature before you walk into a building and all of those things that our business leaders are wanting to do to make sure that their employees are safe. And I would say, in my lengthy 5-month tenure as president of the chamber, I have never been so proud to lead this group than in the last month, because we have gotten thousands of calls and emails from businesses across Kentucky. And every single one has said, how can I help? Every single one has said, can I donate masks? Can I give money? Can I provide transportation for people who don't have it, or to transport these PPEs? And so just know the businesses of Kentucky really have, I think, done everything in their power the last month to flatten the curve and to make sure that everyone is safe. And so I think now it's just like Senator McGarvey said, we've never seen anything like this before. And so when we face these kind of challenges, we do have to prepare. We have to prepare because it's not going to be just flipping a switch and reopening. We have to get supply chains back in stock. We have to get our workforce back in order. But thank you all for Senate Bill 50 and the precautions and the measures you guys took the last couple of days of session. It does make it easier on businesses to start thinking about reopening in a safe manner. So I just want to thank you all. I said this is kind of new for us. We thought we'd see how it went. We have about 300 people watching. So I think it's been kind of fun. And like we said, we're all kind of adapting to this new normal. And we now know we can do things like this and get your all's message out to the business community of Kentucky. So I just want to thank you all, and anything left you guys want to say, we have a couple extra minutes. If not, we can wrap up.
Ashli, if I could, I think Joni's come up with a really interesting idea. When you think about Rockcastle County having one of the better rural facilities that could treat people with COVID-19, I think they're the largest out of an urban area. But then you've got other hospitals, and I'm going to use my area, or Ephraim McDowell over in Danville. These places could be used to do some elective surgeries because they're not in what I don't think will be in heavily populated areas where you'll see that transmission. And the other thing, again, you mentioned 3 Senate bills, and I want to speak to my House colleagues. A lot of the things that came out of those Senate bills that were passed were collaborative. There were bills that started in the Senate, but a lot of the additions that made them the bills that we have talked about were due to input and additions, or amendments as we'd call it, that came from the House, and truly a lot of collaboration between chambers and between parties on all of those.
Yeah, I think there's recommendations. And I think one thing from the business community perspective that we're just going to have to kind of wait and see is how much, how soon we can get testing. I think that's going to be a big part of reopening kind of for business. And those PPEs are going to be essential for not just probably the frontline workers, but anyone coming in contact, retail, et cetera. So we are excited about kind of helping pave a path forward. One thing I did want to mention before we hop off is, in this kind of economy, I know it sounds silly, but there are still some things have shifted, and there are some businesses that have now ramped up. If you think about Amazon, or you think about grocery stores or pizza delivery, or all those things that we're all now utilizing at a much higher level. I think I know my Amazon guy by name now because I'm at home ordering on Amazon. But those facilities are ramping up. And so we were happy to partner with the Education and Workforce Cabinet for a campaign called Who's Hiring. And it's a website basically that has all of the employers in Kentucky that are hiring. And so for the tens of thousands of people that are now on unemployment, to no fault of their own, and hopefully all of them will go back to their previous job. But there are still some employers in Kentucky that are hiring that we want to make sure that word gets out there. So for the several hundred people on the call, if you do have open jobs here in Kentucky, please let us know. We'd be happy to share those with the job seekers of Kentucky. Any last comments? We had one more question that I don't think we'll probably talk about, but someone did request, President Stivers, that if you do take pictures of yourselves four-wheeling out in Clay County, to share those with the rest of us.
Be glad to. It's beautiful down here with all the red bud and dogwood and the greenery coming out right now.
It is. I said the silver lining of all this, especially with 2 small kids, that the weather has been nice. And so we've been able to get out and about quite a bit. So that is definitely a silver lining in all this. But thank you all. I want to be respectful of everyone's time. We really appreciate it. I'm really glad this worked out. Thank you all for, a successful session in the midst of all of this, and a lot of good things got accomplished. Thank you, Jason, for being such a great chamber member and for moderating this call. And please let us know how we can help you all, and we will be in touch soon. So have a great weekend.
You guys stay safe.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Stay safe.